Okay. It's always funny when that computer voice.
I continue.
She's so American.
Thanks for coming to this online event, everyone. My name is Robert Albazi, and I'm a bookseller here at the Paperback bookshop. I'm speaking from the bookshop here on Burke Street, and firstly want to acknowledge this was and always will be on the lands of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Before we get started, I'd also like to let everyone know that, of course, there are a few additions to our Salon series. This discussion will be available to listen to on YouTube after tonight. Alongside that, we are creating 50 pamphlets for each night, each salon, which will include a complete transcript of the conversation and a newly commissioned piece of writing by the author. But now that all of that housekeeping is out of the way, I can introduce Sean. Sean O'Byrne grew up in Melbourne's outer suburbs and studied arts, law, and acting. His first book, A Couple of Things Before the End, was shortlisted for the New South Wales, Premiers and Queensland State Literary Awards. I should note too that it has been a favourite at the Paperback bookshop since it came out. So Sean, thank you very much for being here and talking to me.
Thank you very much for doing this, Robert.
That's all right. It's nice to finally be able to do this because we had this planned quite soon after the book came out, but of course lockdown got in the way.
It's true. Fateful April 2020, right?
It's wild. It's so far away.
Yeah, it was time to go home in April 2020.
Hey, look, before we get into talking about the book, the first question I want to ask is a simple one, but it's very appropriate because it's a question we all ask each other at the bookshop, which is, what are you reading at the moment?
Yeah. I've just finished a little book about Helen Garner, so I've had a strange time where I've kind of I've read a lot of Helen Garner, and I got interested in and needed to read a lot of narrative nonfiction, which I hadn't read so much before. So I read Nell Scard and Rachel Cusk and Sheila Hetty, and that was all interesting. Maggie Nelson. Something like strong autobiographical narrative nonfiction, and then what people call autofiction. And that's now finished, and I'm nearly back. I can now go back to fiction, and I'm quite looking forward to it because part of looking at the Garner book was sort of setting up kind of a fight between strong narrative nonfiction or autofiction and fiction, between talking unusually honestly as yourself and then talking through people that you make up or impersonate. And I'm interested to see what it's going to be like to go back to the land of impersonation, the land of making it up so much more after a sort of a time away. And you would know this as a classy bookseller. So one of the things I got, which I'm really looking forward to, that I got out was this, which is
cool
book.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the first fiction book I read.
Yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to it, and I think it's going to be, it'll be like, I don't know, the mist and the musk, to go back into where you really can pretend, make a kind of spell is going to be, I think it's going to be interesting to feel the difference.
Yeah, I always find autofiction a little bit disorientating, and also there's something I don't like about it because I always try to, I do enjoy it, but I feel like there's already such a temptation to read all fiction autobiographically.
Yeah.
And I find
yes,
autofiction only encourages those readings more. So I find if I switch from autofiction back to regular fiction, I'm still looking for the writer sometimes when I shouldn't be. Characters are characters. And sometimes they're based, of course, on writer's experience and things like that, but I always really try to remember that fiction is its complete own world. I don't like to get the two confused.
No, and the beauty of making another person up is that even you, the writer, you just won't understand exactly what your relationship to them is. How much of them is you, how much of them isn't you. That's exactly what you're in it for, I think, because in some way you don't want to know that. You want to leave your ordinary self behind, forget it. But also the lovely thing is when you pretend to be somebody else, things that you don't want to admit about yourself start to fall back across at you. The thing that was so interesting about looking at autofiction, especially Nausgard, who I hadn't read before, I don't know, maybe despite myself, I was very strongly impressed. I know that, like, through talking to other people, there's a sort of starting negative idea that there was something maybe, we didn't really want this, and that something wrong happened in the culture, that so many people were paying attention to this one Norwegian man talking for 3,500 words about his own problems. And I maybe, in a standing around way, I would have maybe thought that too, but the things he's able to say and the way in which it makes you remember some of the most difficult things about running your own personality, and the value of that being separate to how a fiction would do it. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly, but there was something there. I was very moved by it. And also which he says, the impossible job of it. What would it be like to be that truthful all the time? It's insane. And yet he does do it. And yet what he gets to is this poignant thing, which is, well, I really need so badly sometimes to tell the people I love the most or rely on the most, the thing that's the most difficult thing to tell them.
It's incredibly difficult. I mean, I'm trying not to get in a I mean, we're here to talk about your book, not Nausgard's book. But yeah, it's interesting territory, and it requires a certain amount of cruelty too, which is incredibly problematic.
Yes, that's exactly right. And they all talk about that. And that's one of the things that was really hard to try and think through, which is whether the cruelty is justified, whether the transgression is justified. Garner herself is so interesting on this, and her life has been so full of that. Her life and work has been so full of that question. So it's sort of about that. But to turn it back more towards the fiction book, one thing I had to try and think about was, well, why did I do the first book so much impersonating other people? Like, why is that necessary to me? Because what I found all the time, of course, is that I really need that method. I can't tell about very personal things without pretending to be somebody else, pretending to be Wayne. And as soon as I'm Wayne, yes, plenty of permission and confession is possible. So I was really interested, without sort of picking a fight between the two methods. I did get something, this is a little boring, but I got closer to the idea of, it really depends on how your own sort of personality or psyche is organized. You either feel it's such a strong need to push everybody else away and just be unnaturally honest as oneself, or that can't help you, that in some ways just too traumatic or frightening or unsuccessful, and you need to, out you go, making Wayne, Celia, Wayne again, and you talk your head off once you're there. And that was what I did find to be true in the short story book.
Did you find that any particular voices were, I mean, you mentioned Wayne now, were there particular voices you enjoyed writing, like particularly enjoyed writing over others? I should make note to everyone who hasn't read it, most of the book is written in character voice.
Yeah. I think it's strange. Enjoy is strange. Sometimes it was something that I went through with a few of them was, I would start out with a kind of something that was more like seeking revenge, or more sort of simply aggressive. So people I disliked or was frightened of, either in the family, or when I was in my upbringing, or people at school. And you start with that sort of, all right, here we go, I'm going to beat you, right? And it's not very, there's some aggression in it. And early-ish, I came across a remark by Harold Pinter saying, yes, but if you do that, you'll find out sooner or later so what? It won't be that interesting to you, and interestingly, it won't be that interesting to other people. It's the difference, I thought, between some sketch comedy and fiction. In sketch comedy, you can set somebody up and just pretty much point at them. It's not that long, and it's okay to get out that amount of aggression. With fiction, you stay longer, and then sooner or later, you start to find out, well, I can't just keep looking at this person from somewhere, next to or above them. And then this lovely thing happens where you begin to mix your own memories and your own fears, your own likes with them. So that was it more. It was every time breaking my first sense of dislike, still getting to have some of it, but then finding that somebody who I would have been pretty oppressed by when I was a kid or a teenager, footy blokes, the phrase is always footy blokes, something like that, the men of Australia. Through impersonating them, it did call off an amount of maybe too superficial first aggression or too superficial first resentment.
It's interesting to hear you talking about it coming from that, initially from that source, because when I read stories like, say, A Night with the Fellas,
yeah,
I think there's a certain endearing quality. I mean, there are ugly aspects, but I guess it's surprising to hear they initially came from perhaps more of an aggressive position.
Yeah, and that was the work. The work was really to get out of that enough and come back and to find this reservoir of feeling for, just blokes, standing around blokes, and other people too. It's all about. It was so much of it was about working out of a first alienation and saying, no, but these people are scared like I am, and also recognizing the part of me that's like them. I remember saying to somebody, like, some attitudes or ways that Australian people comfort themselves or reassure each other, I do it all the time. I'll say no worries 25 times a day. Recognizing my participation in some of the bigger sort of, I don't know what, cultural patterns or ways of being in Australia, that was part of the work of it as well.
There are great moments of that, I think. Even the first story, Scout, these anecdotes of growing up, being part of these Scouts, and this wonderful style of speaking that is distinctly Australian and probably mostly associated with men. Of wanting to, it's almost like desiring a certain like sincere expression and then constantly sort of self-sabotaging along the way.
Which I know. One of the things I thought was sort of interesting was what was characteristic of Australian society and culture, separate to, say, the English or, people in the United States. And one thing I did think about was, and some of it's still a problem for us now, and it's sort of tiring, boring, which is a certain kind of white working class performance, white male working class performance. That's really what so much of the Australian identity has been built on. And I felt a lot of dislike towards that when I was a kid and a teenager, standing around listening to the fellas. But I did see some more of the advantage to it, where we have been a group that did make itself without an aristocracy. I'm very struck by this when I look at sometimes the way the English talk about themselves to themselves, the problem of class there, and the idea that there is this group that's just having this lovely champagne cocktail party all the time, and big parts of the population aren't part of it. The disadvantage of Australia is that certain kinds of, refinedness or culturedness are really difficult to get along with here. But the great advantage is that there is more of a sense that anybody's more or less got a chance. I think sometimes, and this might be true further ago, that we were more ashamed of ourselves as sort of like a simple bunch of people. But I get the sense more, maybe in the last 20, 25 years, that the happiest part of the egalitarianism in Australian society and culture has sort of come through. Having said all that, though, I shouldn't say any of this without saying it's still worse than boring for lots of people. Lots of people can't find enough of a place in the middle of this no worries stuff, and don't participate enough. And the whiteness and the maleness of Australian society is obviously still something we're going to have to work really hard to break up enough. And people are doing it. It's getting done, but it's, Christ, look at who the Prime Minister is. We're still pretty drunk on a certain kind of Australian white male performance, and it's going to take a long time for us to get out of it. Very enough.
I agree, and I think it's a subject I think will be good to touch back on later, after you know, you've done a bit of a reading, because this idea of performance is definitely incredibly important sort of theme in the book. A lot of the voices are performing a voice, and trying to fit into a sort of social convention of how to speak. And those slip-ups in the performances, those cracks, are the most revealing things, and often I think sometimes, the most affecting and sometimes heartbreaking, because they demonstrate a sort of inability to get to this point of maybe breaking through to some big emotional connection or something.
No, thank you. That's so nice, because that is the thing I think I almost wanted more than anything else, was to show the difficulty of performing a personality and the ways in which it's hard to do it and it becomes unsuccessful. And I thought, yeah, sometimes it's funny, but it's also sad the way in which plenty of blogs, plenty of people, all different kinds of people, me included, you watch people try and hold on to just the amount of self they've been able to assemble so far and just keep, yep, okay, I know, I'm here, you're there, the whole thing, we've got to keep it going. And then to watch that, and then and what is funny is especially Australian ways, because we don't have some of the resources of other people. He does get a little thin on the ground. Okay, Robert, I don't know. I hear your voice and it is hard to say, and I grew up with a lot of men like that who, if you put, like sooner or later when they were arguing or trying to say what they wanted or they didn't want, their personality kind of literally ran out in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. It's true of most of my male relatives. And it's funny, but it's sad. And I'm not exempt.
There is, yeah, but that's a nice, that's a good balance to explore, that humor and sadness. And
Yeah.
I think I do want to talk about it, but maybe after the reading, because I think we'll get back to that at a good, that'll be a good point to get back to it. I guess one thing I wanted to ask you about too was that, some of the stories like Julie and 11 a.m.
Yeah.
Are written with these great rolling monologues. They have this great amount of momentum to them. And I know when you were in the bookshop probably a while ago, we were talking about sort of writers like I think Thomas Bernard and Laszlo Krasner-Hawkeye that write in similar styles. And I was just wondering what it was about the monologue in particular that appealed to you.
Partly to do with what you were just talking about, which is the idea that you just keep a personality running beyond its means, if that makes sense. You just let the thing keep going and you watch it kind of try and thicken itself, then you watch it thin out. So I think it's got something to do with that. Not letting there be usual, maybe easier narrative interruption. And then hopefully the technical test is, well, is it still interesting? Are you still holding somebody in there? And the lovely thing which I got interested in too was, are you introducing enough exterior detail that's still credibly what somebody would actually include when they're talking? I love that problem. I was really interested in that and got quite sometimes judgmental about the ways in which I thought people did it improbably. Like I say to you now, we're supposed to be having a conversation. And I say, yes, but I don't know, with the light coming in through the window gently on the table. And it's like, no human being has ever said that. And you notice sometimes in voice narrative, it's really difficult to get around the problem of making sure you're putting enough in the voice so people know where the person is. And the person I learnt from, some of the people I learnt from was David Foster Wallace was a bit of a master and teacher to do with this. And I think he would have learnt some of it from maybe Nabokov. But in brief interviews with Hideous Men, there's a couple of narratives where I did try and pay attention to the way he has this extraordinary one called The Arm. And it's about a hideous man who is missing half an arm and uses it as a way to get sympathy and to get the attention of women. But what was so interesting was in which the physical details of the arm and also the details of him and his friends and where they drank and did their things, it was so skillfully mixed into just what his voice would say. And the other person who was a great teacher to do with this is Lydia Davis. In her collected stories, there are different narratives which are all voice, and she again was somebody, but also sometimes it was also a question of relaxing a little and knowing that just the characteristic rhythm of the voice itself was enough detail, was sort of almost did what physical detail could do. Sometimes I'm trying to stuff a chair in, and it's like, no, don't worry. There's a story in Lydia Davis called Mrs. D and Her Maids, which was, it taught me so much, or I tried to learn so much from it, which was, it's just in the way this particular lady was talking about the problems that she had with her maids and so on, but just, it was just in the characteristic in the exclusions, in the inclusions, in what she thought was a problem. So that, and then a little, like you say, a little Thomas Bernhard, although he was harder to learn from because that's an amount of concentrated performance, like the mystery of how he's able to make that much anger, that much resentment bearable, you know, as a narrative is almost like you sort of squint at it, but it's very hard to see, even really follow technically how it's possible, but he does it.
Yeah, and they're almost not bearable.
Yes, well, that's true.
Yeah, I think, yeah, yours is definitely reads far more easily, and it's interesting listening to you talk about those sort of inclusions and decisions, you know, when characters might get distracted by something, but it's too novelistic, not as much, you know, too probably omniscient or something to be properly believable in voice.
Yeah.
And I think especially that Julian 11 a.m., there is a lot of, you know, it's an incredibly dense monologue because we're, you know, it's an academic sort of discussing the ins and outs of all these different theorists, but it folds in on itself enough, and it has enough sort of jarring little points of what I'm doing, and like, and things like that, and sharp turns, that it does flow really well.
That was an interesting story. That was one of the last ones, and that came out of me thinking that I had to put myself in the frame, that I had to impersonate myself as well. I'd made various impersonations, both of more working class people, outer suburban people, and then some haute bourgeoisie people. And then who was left but me and my type. And so I did think, oh, it's going to have to be you. And the way that I would have been when I was an undergraduate, and the kind of, what I really wanted to show was, like, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to show certain kinds of personality running on and trying to defend themselves, well, God, I can remember being a undergraduate stuffed full of French theory, talking my head off, and in real trouble as to whether I knew there was something wrong with my relationship to the theory and what I was actually, I don't know, needed, wanted, could talk about, couldn't talk about. And the dreadful thing about the theory was that it gave you a kind of permission. It was like a passport that you hadn't earned. So you would just, you know, use your theory, and somewhere behind it is you swimming around going, I don't know, but Derrida does.
You're used to throwing out those sort of key words, right? When if you study arts or something, and yeah, because of course you move through them so quickly in the course.
Yeah.
And you like do one reading and you're like, oh yeah, I sort of got a handle on like Kant or something.
It was also that talk about like the starting aggression into some more sympathy. That was also good revenge against the foolish post-structuralism, bad postmodernism. I went to university in the 1990s, really in the high tide of French theory, and I really did want to sort of settle accounts is too much, but I really wanted to say something back, because that theory, I don't know, I experienced it as pretty hurtful. I really wanted to get to literature when I got to university, and instead I got told that literature was oppressive, and that there was this sort of now new superior sort of system that would you could sort of put on literature, and it would show that literature was just a sad thing that had too much faith and was, you know, in the way of all the better thinking and planning we could do. And I really did dislike that, and knew that there was something wrong with it. But then also, it's not as if I would say that anybody should get along with that theory, theory and reading a lot of theory. So again, like but that boy is very much, pretty much me at 20.
Well, I mean, speaking of loving literature, and you know, the footy mysteries are hilarious. And to me, I mean, for anyone who hasn't read the book, they're you know, written like marketing blurbs for like footy themed mysteries, and those, I mean, Mystery of the Sleeping Mascot, I think I laughed out loud every time I read that. I even like read it aloud to like a few people. But to me, those were like, that to me was demonstrating a certain love for
Yeah,
like literature. And
yeah.
I was wondering, like, there's such a strict convention with those marketing blurbs. And it seems like you were having fun playing with those.
Yeah, well, it comes out of book selling a bit. Like, you know, years of looking at, I don't know, the way books are treated and described. I can't remember. This might be Lydia Davis again, I reckon. If I think of it now, and Bartholomew. So some people give you the idea that you can get out of some of the usual narratives by just imitating other culture forms, but trying to bend them towards literature. So there's a Bartholomew story called How I Write My Songs, which just really, I remember thinking, it's one of the few reading experiences I've ever had where I really felt like my head was fizzing. I really took the top of my head off because I was getting information about something I really wanted to do. It's this man explaining how he writes his country and western songs. But there's a really delicate ambiguity between him being a fool and what he's doing not being worth it. And him just doing what anybody should be allowed to do, write his country and western songs. But he really walks you through, and the sort of not so clever conventions of a country and western song. But it also gets to this thing which I did want to try and say something about or get towards, which is also, this is going to sound a bit pretentious, but like that high culture this room for high culture has gotten smaller and smaller, and we really do live in a world now where popular culture, sponsored by corporations, sponsored by pretty like the dumbest kind of capitalism, has just expanded to the point where it's almost all culture. So I thought that was something that Bartholomew pointed towards, where sometimes to make a very literary narrative, it almost feels like I shouldn't say, but it's almost like you're avoiding the problem. Like, we're swimming in bad popular culture. We're drowning in it. It's everywhere. That's probably the biggest change between the late part of the 20th century and now. Literature sort of has to take the wound in, and even if it is in the slow process of being more or less abolished, I don't know, I think it has to register the change. It should at least, maybe this is not true, and you could say, no, literature should just go out as literature, very well defended. But I can't, there's something about a literature that doesn't even notice that high culture has been moved to a side, really, since the 1960s. It's just a different relationship. You can look back on how people thought about some poetry and literature, sort of even up until the 1950s. It was just more with us, poetry. Right? And since then, no. Big, stupid, corporate-sponsored narrative is out of control. It's running around everywhere.
So Footy Mysteries is almost your integration of those? Is that like, I'm not trying to be
No, it's a little, yeah. It's trying to say, it's expressing some like hostility towards some pretty, maybe, not so clever or too much relied on forms of culture. Because the other thing, it's partly just working off some of the feeling that you get growing up in Melbourne and just the sheer size of the footy system, just going, oh, come on. That feeling in March, and you're like, oh, Jesus, I thought we might have a bit more time. And maybe a little more that sense that it's never actually quite happened to the footy, really, but that sense that it's always maybe getting to the point where it's a little danger of becoming too bloated, too cashed up. The beautiful thing in footy, that sort of more, that community, the good community in footy, is under a bit of danger as it gets sort of glossier, and
corporate sponsorship.
And like one thing that is maybe comes through in the book a little is, I did try and think about this, was the difference between Australia in the 1970s passing through, because the stories kind of start more in the 1970s, then go through the 1980s into the thousands, and then into what might be coming in the next couple of decades. And one thing I was thinking about was the 1980s and the way in which they changed the country, the way in which that old, more closed, more English Australia then got cashed up, more brash and more, got its working amount of neoliberalism. But then, trying to figure out the things that were both funny and sad about that, about the Australia that got that much mining money and then what it did afterwards.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, thinking about the future of what it did afterwards, to maybe move into this reading you're going to do, if you wouldn't mind.
No, no, not at all, not at all, not at all.
Yeah, I think as it does relate. I mean, I'll let you introduce it, but it is from a later part of the book.
Yeah, so one of the things was in the book was to try and bend the last stories into what could be coming in climate change and the sort of next climate emergency, and imagining people that I knew I grew up with in the outer suburbs, and then also people that I met more in the inner city through the university or in the bookshop and so on. So outer suburban people, and then more upper middle class people. Imagining what would happen with middle class people when there are serious water shortages, serious food shortages, what could be coming towards us. And I've told this story before, but I was house minding in Kew, and I really did hear this man come up and say to another man in the reservoir, they're all walking their dogs in the reservoir. And I sort of looked at it with some sourness. I was like, look at I noticed their community, their sort of comfortable community. And this man said to the other man about the dog, she only drinks running water. She will only drink running water. And it took me a moment to work out what he was saying, which was that if you put a bowl of still water in front of the dog won't have it. And it was one of the few times I got an idea for a story pretty much right away, where I thought, well, what is going to happen? Like, that's, if the dog is running it at this level, what's all this other, what the hell is, how much of this are you going to be? Anyway, so.
You'll be horrified to learn that Mike Tyson feeds his pigeons Fiji water.
Yeah, here we are.
Like the bottled Fiji water.
Yeah, we'll get ready, all right? You need to let's see what the next 25 years does to that. So I did try to put together this story called Missy, which is basically imagining someone in, you know, Melbourne's upper middle classes, trying to figure out what they would do in climate change. Oh, and I should say it's all written in emails. So this is an opening email from a lady called Genevieve to a lady called Georgia. Dear Georgie, it feels like ages since I've written to catch up and see how you are there at Highfern, and of course give you all the gossip from here. How are things with you? I'm fine, and David's pretty well. Of course, it's very hot down here, with these being the absolutely worst weeks. 46 again yesterday. We've just shut all the front part of the house up completely now and don't use the sitting room or the library or any of the east-facing rooms. They were becoming quite intolerable. David took our old barometer with the temperature thing into the sitting room this morning at 10, and it said already 35 degrees at 10. He thinks it's all so interesting, of course. He'd take the barometer into every room all day if I let him. But I said, that's enough barometer now, thank you very much. The big thing now is everybody ripping up their carpets. They don't want them anymore. You should see it in Stanthorpe Street out the front. It is odd. You see huge rolls of carpet. But we're very happy doing our camping in the kitchen where there are the tiles. And it's so much worse now for so many people, I always think. Poor Roger in that awful little unit in Hawthorne, lying down in the bath half the day because he's so terrified of getting heat stroke. I saw Diane Sutcliffe the other day at the food drop, and she's having a really dreadful time with poor Hamish. I imagine the disabled have a very difficult time now, quadriplegics or paraplegics with no electricity for them. You hear such dreadful stories. Di has to keep going at that rotten little hand generator for an hour just so Hamish can go up and down the hall a bit in his chair. But I do have a happy story, which I think you might enjoy. Libby has certainly become quite the Queen of Tasmania. You would have heard of her big time success, but I got an email from Ross Trengenning the other day, and he really was down there at Christmas and really saw it all. This fabulous place. Ross, can you imagine? He had to be down at some dreadful food drop out of Launceston for Libby's people to come and get him at 5 a.m. But you know Ross, he'd go to the Sahara Desert if he thought he could get one last glass of Cab Merlot. Can't you see him waiting with his Panama on and his bow tie and his tongue hanging out of his head? Though bless him, he did get himself right into this high security estate or whatever it is and saw the whole thing, this ridiculous green valley. It really was one of the last privately owned vineyards in Australia. She apparently gets a ton of water. The army gets her extra credits, would you believe? And Ross went to a lunch there where they were all in there, the army, the energy police, the reg police. They were all around Libby's table for a lovely tasting. And of course, everyone else pays a fortune. Dear God, the prices she gets. Ross said some madman in Sydney paid her $15,000 for a bottle of Pinot Gris. It just shows where we're up to, I think, and I think certainly the government has some questions to answer for. But anyway, enough about old libs. What I wanted to write to you about, darling, and I'm sorry because you must get a lot of these inquiries, but I was wondering whether there was any space coming up at Highfern. The situation here in Melbourne is really not good, and I just say to you very frankly, this is just to you, that I was hoping that David was going to be a bit more proactive and show a bit of activism in terms of our situation here, as there's a real chance we should now be finding some other accommodation, and that's why I've written to you. I thought it would be just the thing to send you a quick inquiry, but don't take any trouble. You just let me know when you can. Love to Brian. Love to from David, of course. Jen.
Thanks for reading it, Sean. It was great. It was great to hear you reading it. It's really different to hear it in that particular voice, I think. And
I should say later things get worse.
well, yeah, I want to. That's something I do want to talk about, because I think it's a very fine balance that you sort of manage, and you do it really well, is these moments of vulnerability in the stories. I mean, just from that first beginning of that story, that character is not somebody who you really want to feel much sympathy for.
Yeah.
But for example, and I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone, but I think, you know, and the title of the story is Missy. I think the moment where, after Genevieve has sent these emails that become increasingly less formal, increasingly desperate, to get this housing, I think actually the most profound example of vulnerability is when she reverts back to that formal tone.
Yeah.
She withdraws her application for her dog Missy. I think it's leaning on this sort of, this idea of performance again, social performance, and trying to just squeeze as much out of it as you can. And it's a crutch that perhaps doesn't work in crisis points like that.
No, that was what was interesting and sad, which was, because part of the thing that's happening is the things that have worked aren't working. And she's had a good run, like a lot of us have had a good run. This is the other thing, like setting her up as somebody who has had too much privilege and then is finding that her privilege just is running out, really, in front of her own eyes. But again, to, like, I don't know, sometimes in making that story, I would think about what would, like when I said she doesn't want to go to a public reserve and she would find the crowds very difficult, like, I don't know, the arrow pointed right back at me. I would be beside myself if I didn't get the little list of things that I want, that I've been quite used to because I've settled myself in the inner city. You know, we're all Genevieve Center, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are other similar points of vulnerability that shine through in the collection. I mean, I think one of the others that really struck me was in Nathan and Jordan. Yeah, and apologies to everyone. I feel like I should keep sort of introducing these stories slightly while I speak about them, because otherwise, if people haven't read it, they'll be
go ahead.
But, you know, where Jordan is invited round to this guy Nathan's house. They're high school boys, or I think I imagine them as high school boys, and Nathan's mum is really strange, and she offers the boys all of these sort of snacks, like in huge quantities, that never be allowed to eat at home. And it's a very funny, sort of absurd story where, you know, Nathan's mum dances and makes them sing a song when they eat the snacks, and you know, Jordan's really invested in like the different ways to cook like potato jams and like which ones are the best. But it all, there's this one very abrupt sort of moment that passes towards the end where Jordan realizes that he wants to be with his mum, and it comes up very briefly, but I think it really demonstrates how well you've balanced humor and a darker quality in many of the stories. I was wondering, you know, was that a difficult thing to do, to make that balance work?
Yes, it was one of the biggest sort of technical jobs, and it's why I tried to pay attention to people who seem to give some clues to how to do it. That Pinter quote I said before was really important to me, because he did define the difference in front of me. It's in Michael Billington's book about Pinter. I read and reread The Birthday Party and God, I'm going to say Homecoming, lots of times, because he's such a he's so extraordinarily good at this, and he pushes his people more into unlikability than I do. You know, he's you know, I tried to learn, and what it was often was this cycle of going through the presentation of the dislike, and then the mixing with my own memories and my own, I don't know, fear, and then pushing that back towards them, and just trying to do that as many times as I possibly could. It was often through like just trying to go through draft after draft after draft and try and let that happen. And it took a long time, and I was very struck by sometimes, like in the early drafts, yeah, it would all be a bit thinner. I'd just be making a Genevieve, and I thought it was sort of funny, you know, to sort of make her talk. And yeah, thank God, if you wait long enough, you get dissatisfied with that, and you realize that the thing that's lovely, if you pay attention to really strong, you know, stories or strong novels, they're always telling you that's not good enough. They're always saying to you, look, the only reason that this thing is worth doing is to break down some first sense of opposition that you've got, and to find out the amount of emotion that you're keeping away from yourself. Yeah, and you won't get it right away. If you just stay in the area long enough, though, you'll begin to make kind of comparisons and confessions that you weren't ready for.
And it moves it away from, I mean, you know, moves it away from just being a thin parody. Like, I think you're sort of right.
And when I was younger, I was much more interested in comedy and sketch comedy, and I think it made me nervous because, again, it kept me. It's almost like the equivalent of not getting stuck in theory. The thing about comedy that I was almost frightened of is that it doesn't do enough of this kind of work. You just stay in the same relation. You stay here, they're there. You impersonate them, you show why you feel a certain amount of aggression, or, you know, you make them ridiculous. But there's something, not necessarily, but at least, let's just say for me at least, I felt that there was something sort of threateningly stale about that, repetitive.
Yeah, and I think especially if, I mean, it goes back to that thing that Hannah Gadsby says in her special on Netflix, where she talks, I mean, that the idea in her special is that jokes only make, you know, they point to some truth, but at a certain point the truth ends, and that's where the joke is. And often the far more affecting stuff is the stuff that's outside of that limit of where the where the punchline needs to come in.
She's so good and so interesting on this. But then, you know, it depends where you are in it, because sometimes I've paid attention to her talking about this, and yet sometimes I do want comedy to be effectively sadistic. I do want that. I don't want, you know, stand up to be called off. It's just whether or not you can bear the certain kinds of controls that are necessary. I'm very sympathetic to her argument that you just, sooner or later, you just can't keep doing this. But I don't know. I don't want every comedian to sort of stop telling jokes, step forward and go, listen, can we just please work to understand each other better?
It's a different genre, isn't it? It you know, there's stand-up comedy that is just about making jokes, and then there's, you know, just like your book. You know, your book is not purely about being funny. I mean, it could have come out that way. Like maybe early drafts were. But you know, it's just a different approach, and it's a decision to make things, you know, darker and to move away from being completely immersed in comedy.
Yeah, and a permissible aggression, like a good permissible aggression.
Yeah. Hey, one of my I'm just keeping an eye on the time too, but one story that slowly actually became one of my favorites in the collection was the Water Girl Tai Taki story. And I think you mentioned, you know, the environmental disaster narrative earlier that really is present throughout the, you know, last part of the book. I think you've embedded that into that story really cleverly and well. I mean, having all of these voices, just this list of voices, these comments for an online video, with the occasional voice sort of cutting in and saying, no, you know, why are we wasting water? There's a water crisis. And of course, just being completely shot down straight after by all these like rude commenters. I hadn't thought about something as, I don't know, normally insignificant as, say, online like comments as being so representative of a particular moment in time.
Yeah, I was very struck by them. Sometimes I think one day I was just looking at something on YouTube and I just noticed, you know, and it's a little bit of an old manny way, but the comments, you know how they comments number. So it might be 52 or it might be something. It was 1.9 million. And I thought, oh, all right. And there was a couple of things. One was like as pieces of characteristic language, they're solid gold. Like just the things that people call themselves and the way that they express themselves. And I have nieces, and the way they communicate by text and stuff is very striking to me. What's happening to the language, that, you know, once the capital letters, most of the punctuation goes. Once there's something that happens once the volume is increased that much, this stuff, it's just becomes a different kind of currency, a lower currency, and it's just and I'm probably part of the last generation that grew up without any social media at all. Even without, like, I was a young man, there were no mobile telephones, so I'm probably a little set up more to just see and be sort of continuously surprised and dismayed and just a bit set back by the difference. And then the interesting thing was to try and make a narrative entirely out of these, but also keep a story. And that was the thing that struck me as well, which was, again, going back to what we were talking about before on the David Foster Wallace and the Arm, you could load it with enough detail. Each comment would give enough of what was going on. That was really interesting to me. So it's just a collection of comments, and yet you get a sense of what actually happened all the time, that there was this, it's this awful show. Everybody's in a hot tub all the time. A particular thing happened. Oh, and this was also in that sort of that sort of 2015, 2016 time, where also the amount of information that was just going to produce a really short-term entertainment effect, or be just a game about lying that was sort of fun or interesting just because it proved how much you could lie to get people just to get attention and make money. There was so much of a sense of that, you know, the beginning of that sort of the early part of the Trump campaign. And then hopefully driving towards the bigger one, which is, can the corporate sponsored, corporate enabled entertainment system we have, it'll, you know, that sense I had more, and I think it'll come more now as the pandemic recedes and we begin to look at what we've got in front of us without the pandemic. And what it'll look like is this gross, cheap, international capitalist entertainment system out of control, and then this very serious problem to do with the weather and the climate, and basically the competition between the two, whether and, you know, this sort of world of taking money off people sort of dishonestly by trying to get their attention sort of any way you can, versus something which really is not especially entertaining in that sense, and just requires, like, you know, the opposite, all of this sort of not very fun right now, slowing, planning, coming down from the, you know, fucking sugar party we've been running for fucking 50, 60 years.
And things do come to a head. I mean, they come to a head in your book, and these unavoidable scenarios, you know, and that's why I guess it's arranged in the way it is. I mean, that short story is before, you know, that's the beginning of the environmental stuff. That's when that corporate entertainment you're talking about is still overtaking that serious issue. And at a certain point in the book, the seriousness of that issue just obliterates every sort of corporate entertainment that could possibly get in its way.
Yeah, I think that's right. By the end of it, the last story, the bunker story, it's sort of, but what I thought was, I don't know, something to be frightened about, or at least try and imagine, was what all the people who had their phones, like all of us, what it's going to be like when, like, we'll still have that sensibility in a strange way. In the middle of a really serious environmental disaster, we're still going to be the people of the smartphone. So the way in which we talk to each other about it, you know, sometimes you can imagine really that an Instagram sensibility is going to, it would have to change, you would think, but I think it'll persist pretty extraordinarily long into what looked like, you know, something like the breakdown of what we've basically had going in industrial capitalism for sort of 200, 400 years. We'll see. I mean, look, part of what the book was trying to do by the end was at least imagine to do that, to turn that into, without being too highfalutin, to sort of try and make a public service by going, like in that way, one of the first books I ever read was 1984. And I think I've always had that idea that that's something that fiction can do. Fiction has this sort of, hopefully not too pressingly political, but that you use it to warn and you use it to show, like just make this sort of, give this imaginative performance of what might happen if the things that we seem to be doing too much of now, we keep doing.
It definitely, brings those things into perspective. Your book does that well.
Yeah.
I think before I go on to we keep talking though, I will just say we will be opening up to comments in the last sort of 5 minutes or so. So if anybody has any, not comments, questions, if anybody has any questions, you can make comments too. If anybody has any questions, just write them in the chat, and Anna will sort of get to them in the last sort of 5 minutes. I think one other thing that I would like to get in, because I'm really interested in this, is the amount of forms that are in the book. I mean, diary entries, speeches, text messages. And I think I have an idea about this, but I was curious as to what your idea of it was. Given that there are so many varied forms in the book, I was wondering what you think it is that sort of holds it all together in the book.
Partly something to do with this, which is finding out this is going to sound a little, but finding out what's possible if you don't practice the most literary kind of short story, and then just find out what's possible if you mostly try and do it through voice and then through imitation of other popular culture forms. When I was young, I had a sort of a bit of a strange literary time when I was a teenager and like in my 20s, where I just grew up in a house where there weren't many books and I didn't know a lot of literature, but I took in a lot of sketch comedy, and I knew that better, and then maybe stuff about politics. So it might be that I just attached less to what you would think of as the more regular form of like narrative literature. I knew coming into this that I was never going to be, and also it's partly so, and therefore I'm just not very good at it. Like I notice other people, my friend Miles Allenson, some people are so good at that fiction description where you set the objects, you can come up with interesting metaphor for things in the physical world. I just don't have that sense. I'm not. And I think so other people would have said this, like you really figure out what you can't do. And then the practice of the fiction just starts to draw into what you find you can do. Yes, I could imitate voices. My whole life, I've never looked at a tree and thought it was an owl or something, like, how people can make that metaphoric intelligence. I don't have it. I don't have it at all. I just walk down the street imitating everybody. So it was to do with that. And then, so like partly a lack, but then turning that into, hopefully trying to turn that into an advantage. And the other thing is, I suppose that idea before of, which is a kind of a confused idea. And there was a point late in the book where I thought, well, I wonder why I believe this, but this idea that literature ought to register, sort of become less literary, which is such a strange thing to do. Maybe it's some idea that if we really hold that I sort of hate this about Western culture, but the forms we've been addicted to the new for so long, and the form, there's just this demand that the form has to keep changing because the rest of the culture, the rest of the society and culture changes. So it's somehow your responsibility to say, yes, it's, sometimes I don't know if I've examined this properly, or I don't know if I even like it, because the idea is it's such a commonplace and we don't think it through. Like, why necessarily? Why can't we have, what's so terribly wrong with having, a short story more or less the way Chekhov made it? Why? And I think sometimes it is just the logic of industrial capitalism leaking into everything else, where we just need new products all the time, and we just sort of, without, again, thinking it through much. So part of it would be a bit like helplessly to do with that, I think. Just the idea that there's somehow you have to, the Ezra Pound idea, make it new.
I think and you do make it new, and I think you blend the voices really well. And it's not just, I mean, this is probably for me to say more than you to say, because you probably don't want to, talk yourself up in the chat. But if it is a sort of working from a weakness, it doesn't appear like it at all. And I think it is a very coherent work. I think in many ways it almost reads like a sort of archive of a history of Australia at a certain point. I mean, it's a collection of miscellaneous, sort of almost like historical diatribes, collated, that gives an enormous history of a country going through an enormous change from old ideals to new, and an end, a permanent end to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's lovely. That is something else that I really badly wanted. And then also, I don't know, trying to work out what was sad and mistaken and also beautiful about what we've had so far, and with the uneasy sense that I think so many of us have now, which is, I don't know, what we thought were our gains are starting to look like the things that are the most distorting and damaging to us. The idea that the West was this big success is really running through our fingers so fast. We just don't know. It is remarkable. We just don't know what or where we are really right now. Because again, so much the thing that we felt the thing that was the source of so much of our prestige is now turning out to be the thing that's probably going to kill us or could kill us, or is at the very least very dangerous.
Well, on those most pleasant notes, we can stop recording, I think, and then we'll open up to questions.
Thank you for doing this.
No. I was wondering whether or not, I was thinking when I was arranging the question, I was like, should I go with the end, like the end of the book, the end of the conversation, because it's a bit of a depressing.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Hopefully people have some less depressing, questions.
Sorry, Robert, how do I stop recording?
I think if you just hit record again, maybe it turns into stop.
Records disappeared. Oh, there it is. It's up there.